Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something dark, visceral, and honestly, entirely unsettling. We're opening up the case file on the Raven Creek incident, better known as the Shadow on Maple Street. Everything we're going to look at today revolves around one single, incredibly disturbing question. What exactly happened to 17-year-old Ethan Walker? To figure that out, we have to look at the events logically. We're stripping away all the local rumors and focusing strictly on the reported timeline. Because you see, we aren't just looking at a sudden disappearance. We're analyzing a systematic escalation of unexplainable events that targeted one specific teenager over a matter of days. We know how this story begins, and unfortunately, we know how it ends. But the steps in between, that's what we really need to unpack. To grasp the gravity of this whole situation, we first have to understand the environment. The setting is Raven Creek, Oregon, specifically Maple Street. On the surface, it's this picture-perfect snapshot of Americana. You know, a quiet, idyllic neighborhood lined with beautifully preserved old Victorian houses and massive, towering oak trees. But here's the catch. It's also a town with a history that absolutely nobody liked to discuss. And as we'll see, ignoring history in Raven Creek doesn't just make it go away, it just leaves it waiting in the dark. Okay, let's dive right into this timeline and map out the first 24 hours, because the pacing of this whole thing is incredibly rapid. It all begins on a cold October night. Ethan Walker is simply walking home after football practice. Completely mundane, right? But as he walks past one specific property, house number 13, the first anomaly occurs. The very next morning, a deeply disturbed Ethan confronts his neighbor about what he saw. And by 3 a.m. that exact same night, the haunting transitions from just a passive visual sighting to an active physical intrusion. Let's break down exactly what Ethan saw during that first encounter. So as Ethan was walking past house number 13 that cold night, he noticed a figure standing in the upstairs window. The description we have is remarkably specific. It was a pale woman. Her face was unnaturally white, contrasting sharply with this long black hair that fell forward, covering most of her eyes. And she wasn't moving. She was standing completely, rigidly still. Ethan, naturally, stopped and just stared at this bizarre sight. And that is when the entity reacted. A slow, impossible smile stretched across her face. It wasn't friendly. It was terrifying. Panic immediately set in, and Ethan practically sprinted home. The next morning, desperate for some kind of logical explanation, Ethan sought out an older neighbor. He just wanted to know who had recently moved into house number 13. But the reaction he got completely shattered any hope of a rational answer. The old man turned visibly pale, and in this hushed, terrified whisper, he said, "Son, that house has been empty for 20 years. I want you to just sit with that for a second. If that house has been locked up and abandoned for 2 whole decades, who exactly was smiling at Ethan from the second floor?" Well, that revelation brings us straight to the events of 3 a.m. that night. Ethan, understandably, could not sleep, and in the dead silence of the early morning, the entity brought the nightmare directly to him. He heard exactly 3 knocks on his bedroom window. Knock, knock, knock. Now, what makes this detail so absolutely vital to the case is the spatial impossibility of it. Ethan's bedroom wasn't on the ground floor. His room was on the second floor. Whatever was knocking was suspended in midair right outside his window. With shaking hands, Ethan forced himself to pull back the curtain. He looked out into the night, bracing for the worst. But nobody was there. The space outside his second-story window was completely empty. But the terror definitely didn't end there. Written directly on the glass, drawn right into the condensation, were 3 words: "I see you." The visceral terror of this moment caused Ethan to literally scream out loud. His parents rushed into his room, threw open the door, and flicked on the lights. But by the time they got there, the message had completely disappeared, leaving Ethan entirely alone with his terror and zero proof of what had just happened. Now, what you should really take away from the sequence is that once the entity made contact, all the rules changed. Over the next few nights, the situation escalated aggressively. Ethan was no longer just dealing with a creepy face in a window across the street. The entity was inside his home. The phenomena became multisensory. Ethan started hearing heavy footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic right above him. He heard distinct whispers coming from completely empty rooms. And most horrifying of all, he heard a woman's laughter right outside his own bedroom door. What's truly chilling is the historical connection Ethan actually uncovered while trying to understand what was happening to him. One evening, searching online, he found an old newspaper article that tied the whole thing together.
20 years earlier, a woman named Sarah Blackwood had lived in house number 13. She vanished without a trace, and the police never found her body. But neighbors reported seeing her standing in that exact upstairs window long after she disappeared. The pale woman Ethan saw wasn't a new resident. It was Sarah Blackwood, or at least whatever she had become.
Which brings us right to the climax of the incident. That same night, after discovering the truth about Sarah Blackwood, the haunting reached its peak. I want to walk you step by step through this final approach because the tension here is just off the charts. First, the pacing of footsteps Ethan had gotten used to hearing in the attic suddenly shifted down into the second-floor hallway. Second, the rhythm changed entirely. The steps became agonizingly slow and incredibly heavy. Third, those steps moved directly toward Ethan's bedroom. And finally, with Ethan trapped inside, the bedroom door slowly creaked open, all by itself. Ethan stared into the darkness of his open doorway. And there she was. The pale woman from house number 13 had crossed the street, entered his home, and was now standing right inside his room. But up close, it was even more terrifying. The records note one very distinct, chilling detail about her face in this final confrontation. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just solid, endless voids staring right back at him in the dark. As she stood there in the shadows, the entity finally spoke. She whispered a single phrase. "I've been waiting for you." At that exact moment, the lights in Ethan's room began to aggressively flicker. Operating purely on adrenaline, Ethan blindly grabbed his phone from his nightstand, switched on the flashlight, and pointed that harsh beam directly at the doorway where she stood. But the light just cut through empty space. The woman was completely gone. So the crucial point here is that while the physical manifestation of the woman vanished, she left something behind. As Ethan lowered his flashlight, he saw it, carved deeply into the wall right about his bed, scratched violently into the paint, was a fresh message. It read, "Now you live in my house." This wasn't just written in condensation like the last time. This was property damage. This was a direct claim of ownership. Which brings us to the absolutely chilling aftermath. The next morning, Ethan's parents woke up to find their son missing. His bedroom was completely empty. The police were called immediately, and they launched this massive investigation. They searched for weeks, but they found absolutely nothing. No signs of a struggle, zero forensic evidence, and no trace of Ethan. Eventually, the town just moved on. Years later, new families, completely unaware of the neighborhood's dark history, moved into the houses on Maple Street, just continuing the cycle of a town that refuses to talk about its past. And this brilliantly illustrates the tragic permanence of whatever's happening in Raven Creek. The legend of house number 13 didn't end with Sarah Blackwood, and it sure didn't end with Ethan Walker. Even years later, people walking past that abandoned Victorian house late at night still report seeing things in that second-floor window. Except they no longer just see the pale woman with the black hair. They report seeing two figures standing side by side, a pale woman and a teenage boy, staring silently out into the darkness. This whole explainer serves as a dark, cautionary breakdown of what happens when a community ignores the shadows hiding in its own history. The facts of this case file are clear, chronological, and absolutely terrifying. Sarah Blackwood was the first, Ethan Walker was the second. But as we wrap up this investigation today, we have to look at the reality of Raven Creek. House number 13 remains standing on Maple Street. Its windows still look right down on the sidewalk. So the question we have to leave you with is simply this. Who will be the next person to walk past? Keep asking questions, keep looking at the facts, and whatever you do, stay curious. We'll see you in the next explainer.